Memory Week 6. We're going to start looking at the second model of memory, which is Baddeley and Hitch. Last week we looked at Atkinson and Shiffrin's model of memory, so this is the second, Baddeley and Hitch. Make sure you read over those pages in your textbook, so feel free to press pause, and I'll see you back in a few minutes. Baddeley and Hitch's model is very similar to Atkinson and Shiffrin in that he believes the same ideas about sensory memory and long-term memory. So he believes that sensory memory is the first entry point of memory, that basically, our sensory information is brought into this area from all 5 of our senses, and if we shift attention to it, it will move on to the next aspect of memory. He believed in iconic memory and echoic memory, and he also believes that information will get transferred from the middle part of memory to long-term memory as well. The biggest difference is that he referred to short-term memory, so that middle memory component in Atkinson and Shiffrin, as working memory. So that was his big adjustment, and he actually broke down that middle section, short-term memory, working memory, which he called it, into 4 different aspects. So he believed working memory was comprised of a central executive, which is almost like the boss, the decision maker, and it had a couple of subsystems working for it: the phonological loop, the visuospatial sketchpad, and the episodic buffer. When we come into class, I'll draw a nice big flow chart that shows how this section of memory relates to sensory memory and long-term memory. It's really hard to find a good picture on the internet, so this will have to do you for the moment. So the central executive, like I said, is kind of the boss of working memory, and it puts together the sounds and visions that come in from our sensory memory. It controls and directs our attention. It's the part that enables us to make a decision, manipulate the information that's in our working memory, and this is why they called it working memory, Baddeley and Hitch, because it was about working on the information here, your mental workspace, and updating and modifying these memories before they go back to the long-term memory via the episodic buffer. So it's the leader, the central executive. Remember, it's the boss, and you need to know at least 3 of those functions that are listed there. The visuospatial sketchpad, it's what receives information from your iconic memory in sensory memory. So if you think back to the Atkinson and Shiffrin model, they said there was iconic memory, and then they just said it went into short-term memory. Baddeley and Hitch say that the iconic memory goes into working memory. In particular, the central executive directs it to a subsystem within it called the visuospatial sketchpad. Pretty easy to remember, visuospatial has got to do with visual information. So this information, sub-stories where visual information is stored for a longer period of time, so more than that fraction of a second in sensory memory. And you're using it if I asked you to visualize anything. So for instance, if I said visualize your local beach now, and if you can see that image in your mind, then you're using your visual spatial sketchpad. You've switched your attention to it, so it's not just in your sensory memory, it's in your working memory of your visual spatial sketchpad. Phonological loop, that's where the echoic memories from sensory memory go to. So it goes to working memory, and the central executive will direct it into the subsystem called the phonological loop. This allows you to store auditory information, so sound information. And for instance, you listening to my voice now and holding it there and repeating it. So if you repeat exactly what I said in your own mind, you're using the phonological loop, so the storage of sound information. The episodic buffer is the section of working memory that retrieves information from long-term memory and brings it into working memory and helps the central executive combine old information with the new information that's coming in. So episodic buffer is truly about bringing information back into long-term memory. Back into short-term memory, or in this model it's called working memory, to ensure that it can help us understand it. Let's put all that together in an example. So, for instance, if you're asked to calculate 8 times 8, the visuospatial sketchpad, so one of the subsystems of the working memory, would allow you to visualize the problem. The phonological loop would allow you to say in your mind 8 times 8. The central executive realizes that we need to actually get some information from long-term memory to be able to actually calculate that sum. So it directs the episodic buffer to retrieve those timetables. The episodic buffer that then retrieves the timetables from long-term memory. As the central executive is the boss, they do a bit of work, so it works out the problem. The phonological loop holds the sound of the answer. So for instance, in your head, if you went 64, that was your phonological loop holding that sound. And the central executive might decide to then save this as a long-term memory, and the episodic buffer would then send the information to long-term memory. Hopefully that makes some sort of sense, but if not, we'll be working on it a lot this week in class. The very last theory of memory that you need to know, so we've now got Atkinson and Shiffrin's model of memory that talked about sensory, short-term and long-term. We've got Badley and Hitch, which also talked about sensory and long-term, but called short-term working memory and had several subcomponents. But the last model is Craig and Lockhart, who actually don't talk about any type of separate stores. They simply talk about the fact that when you receive information, you can process it at 3 different levels. And the deeper the level of processing, the greater the chance of the retrieval. In other words, if you process something at a deep level, you will associate things with it, you will understand it more, and therefore make more links. So therefore, you're going to remember it more. So they spoke about shallow processing, or structural encoding, they called it, and this is when you attend to the physical features of a memory. So when we did the experiment in class, this is when we looked at the capital letters, the physical features of something, and this generally leads to about 20% recall. If you process something a little bit deeper than that, so at a moderate level, and this is called phonemic encoding, so you start looking at the sound features of the memory that you're attending to, this leads to about 50% recall. But ultimately what we should be trying to do is process things at a deep level, semantic encoding, and that word semantic means meaning. So in the experiment we did in class, that involved putting words into a sentence according to their meaning. So memories are encoded according to meaning, and this generally leads to 80% of recall. Much deeper processing, much greater chance of retrieval. That's it with Craig and Lockhart's theory. So it's a very basic theory, but it is one that you do need to know. Now that we've done the 3 theories, we need to move on to 2 other aspects of memory. So looking at types of long-term memory, and it doesn't matter whether you're talking about Badley and Hitch's model or Atkinson and Shiffrin's model, they both acknowledge that there are different types of long-term memory, and in a couple of slides we'll talk about how these are actually organised. So in long-term memory, you can see according to this diagram, there are 2 types of long-term memories, so declarative memories and procedural memories. And declarative memories involve semantic memories and episodic memories, and procedural memories involve implicit memories of how to do things. Okay, so declarative memory, these are the memories that you can declare that you know quite easily. So if I said to you, what colour is the sky usually, you would say blue. That's very easy. So declare means to declare knowledge that you know. There are 2 types of declarative memories though. Semantic memories, so these are just general knowledge and facts about the world that everyone tends to recall in the same way and will have the same memory. But then there's episodic memories, which are your personal memories. So for instance, if I ask you how old you are, that could be a semantic memory, because it could just be general knowledge and everyone could just say 17. But if I said to you, what did you do for your 17th birthday, that's a more personal memory. So that's a more episodic memory because it's related to you and things that affected you. Procedural memories are memories of how to do things, and they're often called implicit memories because We can't explain when we learnt them, and sometimes we can't even explain how we do them. We just know how to do them. And we tend to get better as a result of practice when we're talking about these type of memories. So an example is riding a bike. That's an example of a procedural memory. Tying your shoelaces. Generally anything that involves a couple of steps, and they're things that you've learnt, and then once you've learnt them, you just take them for granted. That's a procedural memory. And the very last thing we need to talk about is how then these memories are actually stored in long-term memory. And there's well, not a piece of research, but there's evidence to suggest that it's actually stored according to the semantic network theory. So this explains how info is stored in long-term memory. Basically proposes that we have nodes, which are like almost concepts in our mind, and that these concepts are hierarchically organized. So that means there's a larger concept or a large node followed by subnodes. So for instance, you could have a node in your mind about cars, and then you would have sub-nodes in there about perhaps Ford, Holdens, Hyundais, and so on. And then under those subnodes, you would then have types of cars. So if you went to your Hyundai, you might have an Excel or a Santa Fe, or I don't know what other kind of cars there are, but you get the point. And all these nodes are connected by links. So the nodes are the names of units of information. The links show the relationship between the nodes, and basically if there's a close relationship, then you would draw, or we would assume that the link would be shorter. Whereas if there's a long relationship, well then it would be quite long. I guess everyone's semantic network is very different. So for instance, you will get to draw one this week, but my semantic network for animals definitely would have cats and dogs with really short links, because I own a cat and dog. So animal is my big node because it's hierarchical. My next subdivisions would be the type of animals I know, cats and dogs. And then under that, I would have particular types of cats and dogs. And for me, I own a chocolate Labrador. So under dogs, my closest node, so very short link between them, would be Labrador. And then the word chocolate would probably appear under there. For a lot of you, the word chocolate wouldn't be associated in your animal category at all. So that's what makes my semantic network theory quite unique. If you've got a dog, you might also have an animal node. You might have a closely related dog node, but let's just say yours is a sausage dog. That means often when you think of animals, you might think of sausages. And for me, that wouldn't be a normal association, but for you in your semantic network, that would be a very normal association. So everyone's is very different, and it depends upon how you store your memories and your experiences in your life. But we will have a go at doing this in class this week. Have a look at this semantic network theory. So I guess this is, someone's that was made up. So someone has got an animal category, and then under they've got birds and fish, and some things that they know about birds and fish. And particularly that this person must own a canary of some sort, but maybe they went to the zoo on the weekend, so therefore ostrich is down there as something that is closely related to a bird. That's for this person's semantic network. Yours would be very, very different. So the animal, bird, fish, canary, ostrich, shark, salmon, they're the nodes. The lines there are the links, and you can see the line between animal and canary is quite long, which means if you were going to try to retrieve the word canary, it would take a little bit longer than retrieving the word bird. So basically it's like the filing system of your mind, and the more files you have to open, maybe the little bit longer it would take you to retrieve that memory. Anyway, we'll talk about this more in class. This is probably one that's a little bit hard to explain in a PowerPoint. Hopefully it's given you a basic understanding. And I think that's it for today, except just a nice little joke to leave it. Hopefully you get a little bit of a laugh out of it. And I'll see you this week at school. Catch you later.